It's just that easy. There we go. There we go. It's doable. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, big pop, big pop. Wave 15 cleared. Early POV. You wanna play Breach? This might be the one. Completely hands-free. Here you go! Ruin 3 Mage Blood, 7 circles. Let's fucking go, bro! Let's fucking go. GG. GG. And welcome to 3.27 Keepers of the Flame, Cast When Stun Chieftain, the full guide. Now, let's go over some important changes from 3.27. Buffs and nerfs. Most notably for nerfs, Foul Breach has been removed from the game, but in my opinion, I think that it is not a big deal, as my versions of the build eventually dropped Foul Breach entirely. So although it is gone, and it does hinder early game a little bit, overall, not a big deal. But they have also introduced many new things. Firstly, we have Foulborn Uniques. Foulborn Uniques allow us to remove a modifier on Uniques for a brand new one. We don't know about them yet, but we can already assume that Valerium and Skyforth and Cloak of Flame should be easy targets to remove bad mods for good ones. This is also very important because Skyforth can become the new mandatory unique, and it will free up a ring slot for your Helical Ring. The endgame has also been extended, as we can now potentially go for a second sub-ascendancy. At the time of recording, we have seen 9 ascendancies, and these ascendancies honestly are rather underwhelming for Cast When Stunned. Because we don't yet know about the specifics of the ascendancies, we will leave the end game to a second video to make sure this section here about league start, early game and late game is as concise as possible. Another interesting change is Nebulous. Nebulous has been changed so that from current assumptions, it will give about 450% elemental damage, as well as super implicits on a synth item. So that is a potential upgrade as well. Moving on, we have Breach 2.0. Breach 2.0 from the videos seems to be another circle mechanic. We love circles and monsters, and with Chieftain Ignite Prolifs, it will become and should be a huge success for this build. As if we just get one DD off, that'll be 2 DDs, 3 DDs, the whole shit's on fire. And finally, perhaps the most important one is Asynchronous Trade. Async Trade will be a huge buff to Ultimatum, because as we know, many items that we get from Ultimatum are very hard to sell. For example, we could loot a 2120 gem But we listed for like 30C, and eventually we don't sell it anyway because it's too annoying. There are so many items such as double corrupted uniques, single corrupted uniques, div cards, skill gems, support gems, and so on that have value but are hard to gain actual currency from. So async trade will be a huge buff. This time, I'm gonna go over some build overview and expectations for you from the very beginning. Cast Stun Chieftain has both benefits and negatives. So, to make it very clear, you can expect it to be great at mobbing, especially in high density environments. However, this build is very weak at single targets, at least until late endgame, and it has a real issue with bossing. So I lastly did not even do 2 stone until like 2 weeks in, and I had to get carried for 3rd and 4th stones. Top, left, right. What? Oh shit! So obviously there are downsides, and while I do, promote that you can do simulacrum, it's not easily done until the late endgame PoB. You could do it earlier on, but it's not very easy to do. For endgame scaling, this build traditionally caps out at around Mage Blood and 4 to 500 div, and past a certain point, the upgrades are both unimpactful and extraordinarily expensive. As a result, I tend to view this as an early league build to generate currency, and to then swap into a 2nd or 3rd build where you can experiment and play around with. And you can carry over your Mage Blood and some gear to other builds as well. This build is also a very low input character, but it is not really completely AFK, because for the most part, you still need to occasionally cast curses and occasionally move around. And for some people, that's totally fine, and for others, you might want a more exciting, action-packed gameplay, which might not be for you. As you might already know, this build excels at Ultimatum, and it is pretty much an Ultimatum specific build. It can still run other things quite easily, but I tend to focus this build for Ultimatum, and you can tailor this build to fit into other strategies as you would please. For this video, I'm going to break it down into league starts, cast and stun early game, and then cast and stun late game. And then I will, in a separate video, go over the 3 different endgame versions I have to avoid confusion. Alright, for league starts, there are several options. In my opinion, I'm going to choose to do slams until Act 2, and then R from Act 2 to Heist, and then Heist for Chaos Recipe until Blood Notch. We shall see about the prices of Blood Notch, but hopefully they are manageable on day 1. So the options here that I have are Slam at its completion, from 0 to 90 plus, pretty much has you play a Slam build, and then convert the entire build later on in the game. The benefits of Slam is that you can complete the Atlas while farming currency at a faster rate than RF. However, it is very key intensive. For those of you who played Slams last night, you would realize that there are many war cries to press, there are many movement skills to press, and many skills to activate while playing. There's also the downside of a very, very expensive respec. I swapped at around level 90 lastly after VFOS, and I spent 2 whole divines in regrets just to respect my passive tree. Next we have the traditional Pox RF. Pox RF is easy to follow. He has a guide already done for everybody, and he can guide you through 0 to endgame basically. And it is up to you on when you should swap between Pox RF and Cast and Stunned. I do typically recommend around 80 plus, but I have heard people go as early as 70 and as late as 90 plus. And so for my choice, it will become RF into Heist. As I said, it will be Fox RF until level 60. So in Act 9, we'll go straight into Heist. And we will Heist for currency and also get some levels until around 70-ish. Of course, with the Heist buffs this league, it should be an easier, less stressful early heisting. So that should help as well. So what I have done for Heist this time in my practice league side is I have followed AP's Heist guide for day 1. And I have done demo, lockpicking, counterintelligence, and agility contracts from level 60 to 90 plus. I also use the Chaos Recipe Enhancer to do mass Chaos Recipes to gain the currency. I would highly recommend you to follow either his or anyone else's Heist guide, but that's my TLDR. As you go through the acts, the sensitive choice you should take will be Thessalio, then Ramako, and then Hinokora as you move into maps, and finally Valaka at the very end. This gives you a smooth early game progression, and then gives you the clear from Hinokora in maps, and then the resistances from Valaka in endgame. I should preface that this build relies on Blood Notch. Blood Notch is a mandatory piece of the build and is required to function. There are many ways to farm a Blood Notch, but I should warn you that lastly, Blood Notch went up in price astronomically on the early league starts. Day 1 ended around 5 divines, then 10 div to 15 div over days 2 and 3. It did eventually taper off down to like 50C, but be aware that it might not be an easy acquisition early on. So this is going to be the checklist you should refer to before you finish swapping into the build. So ideally you want level 70, but at least 85 would be nice. And Blood Notch must be taken, and you're looking for 50% plus, although lower rolls are also okay. This is because we're combining it with Unfaltering for 10% as well as the Sun Mastery to get our 60% required for a balance between Petrified Blood and raw damage. Although Immutable Force is technically optional, it provides a huge QOL, and anything under 961 is the same, although technically 961 or better is smoother in terms of stun. I ran a 544, I think, the entire league for 326, so I would not fuss over any rolls on Immutable. It does not matter. The next checklist is our Pantheons. Because most people default to Brine King during the campaign, you should immediately swap it to Lunaris, main Pantheon, and Tukohama as a secondary Pantheon. Do remember to gradually take the additional upgrades for the first and third parts of the Pantheon. The next checklist is Flasks. Make sure you have Draymond Green's Flagrant Prefix Flasks before you go into Ultimatums, as they are important for survivability. The next checklist is Ignite Chance. Make sure you have Ignite Chance close to 100% in your PoBs and or your character tab, which you can check by looking at your cursors. Refer to the following sources of Ignite to help you choose where to get both Ignite Chance and Max Fire Res. Let's move on to the early PoB. This is the PoB you should be following as you first swap into Cast and Stuns. There are several mandatory uniques for this build. Hook of Flames is pretty much a very cheap option to give huge bonus stats to the build. This is then followed by Immortal Flesh for early game regeneration, Rise of the Phoenix for early game Fire Res and Max Res, and most importantly, Valerium to enable our Cast and Stun thresholds with Blood Magic. The first upgrades you would like to look for come around day 2. Razor of the 7th Sun is a 1 Chaos unique that will be commonly found across raycasts and gives us both easy access to damage and ignite chance on the weapon. Prism Guardian is a rare unique that eventually costs around 20 to 30 chaos, and this gives us the option to get a second reservation on our setup. And finally, Hateful Cursor is the finishing touch of the build that comes from nameless rituals and is not that important early on, but is a great upgrade to have as we move later into the league. This is because we can combine this ring with Defiled Forces to constantly curse and mark enemies to both refresh ignites and find/fish for Hinako explodes for our single targets. Next up is flasks. Make sure you get an eye level 80 flask to roll the +3 prefix Flagrant German Green, and then you can go to Menagerie and craft the immunities required for each flask. I recommend you to roll each flask +3 first because you can get a augment +3 of a certain immunity and you can finish off the rest. +2 is okay, but that's not too bad during the early game. Also make sure to try get the Syndicate suffix of damage leeches life as it helps with early game survivability. During 3.26, many people found that they were unable to sustain the recovery rates during the early Prism Guardian upgrade. This is often because you either did not have a life recovery suffix, so these can be found on both helmets and boots that give up to 21% life recovery rates, and this will stack with all your recovery to give you the sustain required. If you cannot get this roll, you can go for the Brink of Death cluster, which would be an incredible amount of sustain all the way through to late game. Defiled Forces is the bread and butter of this build. It allows us to refresh our ignites on enemies we curse. However, this needs to be an actual manual curse. So our marks from Hateful Cursor allow us to spam generate phantasms to explode, as well as refresh existing ignites. On a tangent, ignite duration from our Cloak of Flame is a relatively important role. This is because during Ultimatum Master fights, a long ignite duration will allow us to carry the ignite through the immunity phase, and then you can refresh it again with Defiled Forces. This means you don't need to fish for ignites 3 times between each phase. Other things to look out for during the early PoB are gem levels and quality. Most importantly, you want to get a 2020 Petrified Blood as soon as possible. I would recommend either leveling your gem to 20 and using GCPs, or buying a low level 10 to 15 quality gem and leveling it again. People have also found that some huge QLs is area effect. So don't forget to quality your RF, as well as optionally take points into Templar AoE and or take area medium clusters until large clusters. Don't forget to take Inexorable, as this is our generation of endurance charges. Don't forget to check the breakpoints in PoB for the areas required on RF. Late game upgrades come with a balance. It's very important to balance the stats that we already have and the stats that we gain and lose from upgrades. Most important will be Ignite Chance. Because Razor the 7th Sun is an early game unique, our upgrades for Razor 7th Sun will often cause us to lose 25% chance to Ignite. There are ways to mitigate this. Most oftenly, this is done by taking tattoos for Ignite Chance, Curse Mastery from the Defiled Forces, and or anointing Ash, Frost, and Storm instead. In 327, Nebulous could also potentially come with the Ignite Chance prefix. Make sure that if you're using a Rare Scepter, that you use the Ignite Chance Benchcraft as a prefix for your weapon. If you end up using the Darkseer, then more than likely you're going to have to use tattoos. We can also look for proliferation sources, as we only need one. So early game, you can use a Fan the Flames cluster, and then move on to Eldritch Implicit Gloves, which can be upgraded up to perfect, and then you can use Rune Grafts to give another 1.2 times multiplier. Regen and recovery should be balanced out, although typically Brink of Death should be enough to maintain recovery rates throughout all gear upgrades, but do check that you might not need it. As we move into harder ultimatums, make sure you are exposure overcapped. This is because exposure is very common in ultimatums, which causes a minus 25% res debuff, which can bring you below cap. Impale prevention can also optionally be dropped, saving up to 4 or 5 points, as it doesn't seem to be that important as we move into endgame character building. This is because we are often already wearing Defiance, and we might already have enough HP, Fizz mitigation, to avoid being killed from Impale. During late game, we are also going to be starting to look for jewels. We are going to be looking for jewels with the prefix % life and any % max res suffix. This is because we can use the Harvest Bench to re-roll any percentage max res into 2% fire. We can also look for jewels with a 7% max life fracture, and then harvest Reforged Fire for triple or quadruple mods relatively cheaply. After getting max res on jewels, you can then drop Purity Fire from your setup and then bring in Flesh and Stone. Make sure you're on the correct stance for the reduction. So some of you might be wondering why we have all these trigger skills such as Fire Summer Pelting, Blade Fall, and so on. That's actually to proc Wrapped in Flame, and it's an optional medium cluster that we can use to give ourselves Covered in Ash for opponents. Life Gainer hits can be acquired through either a Shape of Ring for a life gainer hit with spells prefix, and or a Watcher's Eye with the Vitality life gainer hit. As we move into mid game, we can get the medium cluster Fan the Flames as an alternative, but we should actually aim to look for an upgraded Eldritch Glove Implicit. Either or is good, but we should move towards an upgraded Implicit in conjunction with the Rune Graft of the Bound to give us a 1.2 times multiplier to the glove AoE. The downside can then be mitigated with items such as Skyforth or Radakesh, as those are uniques without important explicit modifiers. Obviously, during the late game, we also want to make sure our rares are being improved and we begin to cap our Chaos Res. In 3.26, Cinder Solar Urn was updated to have these 3 guaranteed modifiers as well as 1 random modifier on the flask. This flask is exceptional for Cast Stun Chieftains because you can get life getting killed during effects as one of the guaranteed modifiers, as well as increased damage taken and a multitude of suffixes available. These suffixes include enemies ignited by you have malediction. This is very good if you are not using Darkseer and don't have a sword of malediction. Katarina's additional curse is also quite nice because we do tend to have almost permanent uptime. You can also try and squeeze in a Syndicate suffix leech mod if you don't have space on your other flasks. Okay, for general knowledge, make sure you understand that spell damage does not affect damage over time. So only modifiers such as fire damage, air damage, area damage will do increases to damage over time. Early penetration also has no effect on damage over time. However, reducing elemental resistances on enemies does. Cold criticals are a crucial part of how we will die. So do your best to avoid situations that get you a cold critical. Sometimes there are monsters that are default to just non-stunning hits. Classic example will be some ritual monsters and some tier 70 monsters, such as the blue ball. Make sure to get at least 3 ascendancy points, ideally 4, before you start doing ultimatums. Fulcrum is an optional method of playing where you use the staff to carry united around. This is a personal preference, so if you would like to play that way, more than happy to. Make sure you only use normal Flame Surge, because this is the one that increases ignite damage of your ignite. Transfigured Flame Surge only increases damage of itself, not of your ignite. So Penance Mark can be used without +1 curse, because it overwrites the curses briefly, but it still summons the phantasms even though it's gone. So you don't need +1 curse. You can get +1 curse and add a second curse, such as Enfeeble, Punishment, Temp Change, and so on, for 2 curse setup. So common mistakes are, you took Brine King Pantheon, you forgot to get Riku, and or your PB is level 1, 0 quality. Your Blood Notch is less than 50%, and or you did not take the Stun Mastery and Stun Node. You forgot to take Flagellant Flasks that give flash hardness when hit. You didn't take the correct ornament mods, which ends up bricking your build. If you have less than 5k life, you are at risk to being one-shot by some mechanics. Make sure that you take all 6 life masteries and you do not overwrite a life mastery node with a tattoo. Don't forget that you do need blood magic to enable cast and stun for Delirium. Make sure you're overcapped for exposure, because it is very common in Ultimatum. Sometimes people will have a upgraded helmet, such as an Elder helmet with either burning damage support, conk support, area support. Make sure that you do not have 2 the same gem in your helmet. And finally, Life Tap and Super Affliction is an interaction where you can give the duration tag to RF through Life Tap for Super Affliction. However, when you get to the point where you take off Life Tap, Super Affliction is no longer a useful support. Okay, bossing tech, here we go. So kill Maligro first. Before you die, take it out. And make sure you just refresh curses. If they all die anyway, then that's fine. Shav's over there, being annoying, so she's here. Pop her. It pops on her. She dies. We'll wait for the big guy to come over. I'll stand here, so Sharon's in between. When the Nightmare comes in between, we put our gem back in, and he'll die. That's it. Okay, so for a brief Ultimatum TLDR, early on, you are going to look for scoured maps until around red map tiers. And as you progress your equipment and gear and build, you can then move on to rare maps, which helps with catalyst drops. It is confirmed the catalysts are affected by map quantity. However, we are still unsure about other loot and other drops. As we move into Endgame, we like to juice tier 17s as high as we can. This is because we can maximize Tainted Catalyst from Trialmaster and or include boss fragments from tier 17s such as Abomination. I believe that more map effect does give more boss fragments in tier 17s. So for the Atlas, we have 2 options here. If you are not rushing a Blood Notch and you're going to progress Atlas normally, then you can choose any early game Atlas you want. So typically I choose map tiers for Atlas and other map drop nodes as we progress. And when we reach our first unlock, we'll get a second tree for Ultimatum. So if you're going to start Ultimatum only, what you're looking to do is to clear as many points as you can to get this tree right here. This tree, it says all the ultimatum nodes minus a few. So make sure you do not take Ruinous Wager, and you do not take Conqueror Stones, because these two are for this brick you build basically. And you do not take Ruining Gauntlets until very, very much later. And so this is around 40-ish, 45-ish completions. And as you progress towards middle and later game, you can then path your way towards Trial Master and then look for the increased Catalyst drop stacks and or include Jewelings. The rest of the Atlas tree will then depend on the meta. Since we don't really know about what the meta is, we typically do well in things such as Strong Boxes, Harvest, Ritual, sometimes Expedition, but it really depends. And obviously things we are not good at would be Legion, that's bad, and so on. You can also do other strategies besides Ultimatum, such as Abyss, and you can also include Rarity. Because we're low life the entire time, a Wonder Trap guarantees 100 rarity, and because if you're using RF can also guarantee uptime on Divination Distillate. Additionally, our gear typically has a very low suffix pressure, and this means you can fit in rarity mods on suffixes rather easily. So in 3.27, a brief ulti guide will be as follows. The modifiers listed in beneficial, free, and moderate can be taken without any thought or of concern. The following ones are annoying, and then these are taken you must. And obviously, you should never take the Blood Degen, Curse Immunity, Ruin, No Regen, and always crits. You can sometimes take Prismatic Monsters if you know what you're doing, but I do recommend to not take this. And obviously, if you have Mage Blood, then no flash charges is irrelevant to you. I will mention that Cold 4, Fire 4, and Razor 4 are the last upgrades to Ultimatum modifiers, but they can cause havoc if you go completely AFK. Now, there are a few ones that are okay, but let's first mention what we can do to gain passive points for the second ascendancy. Firstly, Ramiko can be substituted with double early reduction curses, such as Flammability and Early Weakness. And this will cost us a Whispers of Doom Annoyance and a manual pathing to Defiled Forces. So the opportunity cost isn't that bad. However, this will be a strain on gem sockets as we're adding more curses. We can also drop Valako after getting a Mage Flood at the very end game, because we can use Melting the Flesh and a Business Flask to offset the shared max res. However, we will need many +2 fire max res jewels in this situation. The first sub-ascendancy of interest will be Lycia's Bloodline, Bitter Heresy. Bitter Heresy creates Profane Ground that also inflicts Malediction. And together with the previous node, this gives us 20% curse effect, which will also help with the additional res shred and can possibly go below -20. Since we might be dropping the Darkseer for either a Rare Scepter or Nebulous, this is a great source of Malediction. We can get Conk Ground easily by socketing a Purifying Flame into the Cast When Stunned setup. This allows the whole screen to be triggered, Cast When Stunned, Purifying Flame. The next Delirious Bloodline is probably going to depend on how the skill actually works. Hallucinogenic Tendencies gives us a short-lived copy, and this copy, when it dies, can make areas take increased damage. So for our build, enemies taking an increased percent damage is pretty much close to a percentage multiplier. So this could be good for single target. Depending on how this clone acts, it could effectively become a second character which will deal double damage for a short duration, and that could act as a single target. So the next substance of interest is the Wild Bear. This will give us Adrenaline after reaching max rage. So how can we reach max rage? We can get rage from Vengeance, which will give us 3 rage when hit. However, this caps at 0.5 per second, so that's 6 rage per second, when you're going to need 10 rage to sustain. Depending on how Foulborns work, Home Spirit could be a important unique that removes the no life regen modifier, and then it'll give us a very big source of rage, and this could become a source of permanent adrenaline. And so finally, let's talk about Schizophrenic Dissociation. In my opinion, this will be a untakeable node. It says lose life equal to damage taken. The problem here is there is no time component. This means damage you take will then, after 4 seconds, be yoinked out of your HP pool. It is instantaneous life loss. This also means that things such as Recoup and Blood Notch won't affect this damage because it's not a hit. And based on some of my calculations and guesstimates, it seems that it's going to be very spiky and you end up taking a ton of damage. I do think there is some room for usage with a Defiance Destiny, but even then, I think it'll be very hard to use correctly. So I'm going to very quickly brief Endgame here. This is because this tends to change vastly as the league progresses and as we learn more stuff. So I don't want to lock things in, but I do want to give you a vague guideline as what we were doing last league. So generically, we can start our endgame build with a 7-link RF helmet. This is going to rely exclusively on a 7-link RF dealing damage, and then using a Detonate Dead of Scavenging to explode naturally spawned enemies for our ignites and prolifts. The issue with this build is it tends to come with a lot of bricks. Things like no regen, minus max, less recovery rate, they hurt this build the most when we're doing maps. The upside is it is very smooth because it doesn't need an initial hit by enemies before they die. The second build is Cast When Stun 2.0. So this leans way back into 3.23 League, where we can use a high level Unearth and detonate those spawn corpses to guarantee an ignite on our targets. This damage is then fixed to the life of our unearthed spawns. The benefit of this is it does not require RF, and it can run more map mods as a result. The downside is that it requires a level 30 plus, ideally 32, and I think you can get level 34 unearthed to get your spawned archer corpses at 100k life to get huge ignites. And with this kind of investment, this basically guarantees your simulacrums will always complete, even without Vow Breach. In 3.26, I did not use Vow Breach the entire league. The last build for this Cast When Stun Chieftain is Grueling Gauntlet. Now, Grueling Gauntlet is a very specific way of farming. It's by using the node on the Atlas tree and combining it with things such as Catalyzing and Inscription to get 13 waves of inscribed ultimatums. This build is then used to maximize profits by also running those inscribed ultimatums, as we can run every single inscribed modifier. This is done by dropping PB and then taking as much instantaneous damage recovery as possible. So in 3.26, I used Blood Notch for 60%, Mageblood and Syndicate 15% leeches life, combined with 30% from a Gore Dancer Forbidden Flesh and Flame combo for about 9%, and then a Faltering for another 10%. This gives us about 80% instant recovery from our hits. The remaining 20% is gained through instantaneous recovery, such as Defiance, Watcher's Eye Lapidary hits, and any source of Fire Leech we have to leech instantaneously with Gore Dancer. So honorable mentions. Pathfinder Cast and Stun does seem to be a very legit build this league. It follows mostly from my 3.24 build and 3.23 build, and I will look into making a PoB for that later on. I've also heard many good things about Gladiator and having triple block on the Cast and Stun setup for Grueling Gauntlet. So if you want to roll a Grueling Gauntlet build, Gladiator does seem to be a very good option. Hopefully, as the league progresses, I will provide you guys with a more in-depth endgame video later on. But of course, I can't do it right now, so it will come later. And that is going to be it for this league's Cast and Stun intro video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Special thanks to Linear PoE, as he has done the vast majority of the editing, actually all of it, for this video. And also many thanks to Kurizana, who helped a lot with the PoBs. If you realized my spreadsheets last week were messy, well, he fixed them for me. And if you want, you can check me out on Twitch if you want. And if you didn't like the video, dislike it. You liked it, you liked it. And that's it for me. I'll see you guys in the next video. Probably going to be Endgame guide. And bye-bye. Bye-bye, bye-bye.